right. Well, we are live. Welcome to the Durable Business Podcast. This is a special one and one that's kind of close to my heart because it's around a topic that a lot of podcasts and entrepreneur magazines and don't talk about often enough, in my opinion, which is hard times. I think that most people know intellectually most businesses fail. And yet, if you look at like Entrepreneur Magazine or TechCrunch or any publication, you don't get that impression. You get the impression that building a business is a breeze and that your success is inevitable. And yet, if you've been around kind of the circuit as long as we have, you see failure firsthand and you see it all the time. And sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes companies just kind of slowly simmer down and turn off and you go about your way. Sometimes it's catastrophic. I think in acquisition entrepreneurship in particular, it can be a little more catastrophic because you're acquiring a company that already exists, usually with debt. Sometimes that comes with personal guarantees. And so the stakes are a lot higher. At any rate, I think failure and the topic of bankruptcy is the experience that every entrepreneur wants to avoid. Like you go into any risky endeavor knowing that it's possible, but not thinking it's likely. And there's a lot of things within your control in life, and there's a lot of things outside your control in life. And when you step into the arena, you're kind of stepping into acknowledging that and taking on that risk. And so I'm getting a little long-winded here, but before I introduce our guests, I should also say that the topic of failure is really personal to me too. I've acquired a number of businesses. Not all of them have been successful. And some of my deepest learnings and some of the moments that have shaped me the most were shaped by failure, not success. And after a bout with failure, it was really hard for me to talk about for years. And it was hard for me to even internalize how to talk about it and with whom to talk about it. And it felt like it wasn't the business that failed, it was me that failed. And navigating that was quite the experience. And so for that, I'm really grateful to our guests today who are choosing to talk about it, not years later, not a decade later, but we have three perspectives. We have three people who have said, yes, let's have this conversation. Yes, I want to be part of this conversation, but have all experienced hard times differently. Some have hit hard times, like really hard times, and have rebounded out of it. Some have hit hard times and the plane just didn't crash. It burned. It just, the whole thing unraveled. And we have a story in between that as well. And so today it's a hard conversation because we can't afford to have this be a 4-hour long discussion, though I'm sure we could fill it if we had that time. But what we want to do is give a 50,000 foot flyover of what hard times can really look like behind the scenes, different entrepreneurs' approaches on how they navigated them, how certain hard things like bankruptcy have played out, what bankruptcy is like. I want to demystify that and maybe destigmatize that, and then leave some time at the end for us to compare and contrast our stories, things that we've all learned from navigating hard times. So I'd love to ask each of you, Caroline, Andrew, Damon, one at a time, if you could just briefly, in maybe a minute or so, introduce yourself and your company, and kind of set the stage for how you came to own your business before we get into the conversation of when hard times really hit. And so, Caroline, I'll ask you to start, and then Andrew, could you follow? And then Damon, he'll bring us home.
Yeah,
Caroline.
thanks, Chase. Glad to be here today. It's a good conversation that I wish I would have had earlier on as a budding CEO. So I'm Caroline Chapdelaine, current owner and CEO of North Star Photonics. We design and manufacture navigation components for GPS-denied environments. Think about nukes, jets, bombers, things that need to operate where GPS is either spoofed or completely denied or non-existent. And a quick background on me, because it's why I led to this oddball company. When I came out of university, I commissioned into the Army as a military intelligence officer, served in many places overseas, and then came out into industry, worked for some of the big defense primes, and so had a really good knowledge of how the defense industry works, and then was fortunate to get an MBA from Wharton, which is where I figured out leveraged buyouts and ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition. And that led to buying this company. It was a carve out from a parent company that I did in 2022. We were fortunate to buy not just the equipment and the IP, but we got to keep the whole team. And to kind of give a preview of why this goes badly is a carve out is weird. a capex heavy manufacturing company is tough, and the defense industry is brutal sales cycles. And so I quickly learned all of those lessons in succession as I started this company, moved it, and started getting new contracts. So I'll go into each of those annual failures that I got to experience.
What a hard industry, and what a hard beginning to the story. A carve out is not for the faint of heart. So I'm excited to get into that. But thank you for sharing, Caroline. Andrew, Heer, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So Andrew Heer, former owner, CEO of Summit Mountain Cleaning. My background is actually in private equity. Spent 8 years running a small family office. And prior to that, I grew up in a very blue collar family. My father owns a pool company. So understanding the trades industry was big for me. And I just wanted to, like every entrepreneur, and diversify my income stream. And being on Twitter, as I'm sure all of us were very active on Twitter during this time period, there was a big movement for the quote unquote silver tsunami, and reading about these retiring boomer business owners. And so I saw that opportunity, and parlayed that into acquiring two businesses, both in the cleaning sector, and merged those together.
Will you, Andrew, maybe tell us a little bit on timeline and rough kind of scope of those two companies? Did you acquire them all at once in one fell swoop?
Sure. So the first acquisition happened in 2021, and that was a commercial janitorial company. And the second acquisition happened in 2023, so roughly 2 years later, and that was carpet cleaning, some more peripheral cleaning jobs that were happening. And then just I figured that would have been a really good complementary bolt-on business to the janitorial business, and just merge those two brands together.
Got it. Helpful. Thanks, Andrew. We'll get into the story in a second here, but Damon, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Damon Chlarson. I'm the former owner of Pacific Installation Supply. I acquired the business in 2021, so towards the end of the year. Post-COVID boom, I would say, of the construction industry. I acquired it in 2021 and went about 2-ish years of running it. We had some pretty good times there for the beginning, and then some not so good times at the end. Eventually we were derailed. I mean, we started to be derailed a little bit by interest rates being raised, but eventually we were fully derailed by some fraud that we experienced. Now I am out of the game of business ownership for the time being. We'll see how long that lasts, but I work at W-2, and I'm past the bankruptcy timeline and everything now. So actually, as of very recent, so that's nice. So yeah, we'll get into that too a little bit about how I acquired all that. But essentially, I wanted to buy a business forever. Just seemed like the way that I wanted to live my life, and learn some big lessons along the way.
Well, we'll get into those lessons. Thanks for being here, Damon. Thanks for sharing your part of the story as well. I think you all share some interesting commonalities. So all three of you acquired your companies. We don't have a voice in the conversation of having started. So it's not like failure only comes through acquisition, but each of you acquired post-COVID and around COVID, and probably experienced some very weird turbulence because of that. And then interest rates climbing up, impacting our cost of debt and just the cost of everything. Caroline, will you take us to the moment that maybe the first moment where things started to feel topsy-turvy, and what led to what you would call your hard time or hard times that you're experiencing at North Star?
Yeah, I'm so fortunate that I've gotten to experience this failure annually. I hope for the last time earlier this year, but there'll be 3 separate occasions that I'm going to touch on today where, at least to me, it was failure, and I feel failure, and it will always register these some of the darker moments. God, I hope darker moments of my life. I think I hear God laughing. So the first one was, I think, a very typical thing for a new business owner. I did the carve out. We had to move locations. We're capex heavy and also have extreme regulations from the defense industry on how we build. And I, despite my fancy quantitative MBA, just didn't do the math that we were burning cash way faster than I could foresee and couldn't produce revenue soon enough to overtake that. So within 6 months, we ran out of cash. And there were many things that we did to recover from that, the largest being get an SBA 7A loan. The second time was about a year later, and this was a different experience. This was the defense industry rearing its head for the first time, and me learning our sales cycles are extremely long. And that's where it takes anywhere from 6 months to many years to court a new customer. And it takes easily months to actually get a contract in hand and start producing revenue from that customer. And I just learned the hard way that we didn't time it right. Some things got more delayed than I could have foreseen. And so we ran out of work, really, and then also out of cash. And that ended up in one of the harder decisions I had to make as a CEO, which was a reduction in force. And then the third and more recent one was the impact of the new administration and the Doge group, and the impact it had on the defense industry was not necessarily ending anything like our poor folks in the healthcare industry and other industries that really felt cash disappear. It just delayed things and scared everyone away, and so all of our contracts that we were counting on were put on pause. Unfortunately, that has resolved itself now, and so we had a cash crunch again that we found many ways through. More creativity has come every time. I'm astounded on how many ways you can make payroll that no one ever taught me about. And so each of those was scraping the bottom for cash, for emotional stability. And we'll get into, I think, each of us probably as we'll talk about the personal impact as well as the employee and company impact.
And we will get into that. Maybe a follow-on question or two for you, Caroline. So you mentioned having to do a RIF, lay off some of the team. You mentioned having to go secure capital through a loan that you probably weren't planning to get until times got hard financially. Will you just kind of the flyover of some of the things that you really had to do in restructuring the business or adjusting how you were running the business to deal with these longer sales cycles and the cash cycle and just kind of, frankly, moments where you were running out of capital?
Yeah, there's 1,000 tactical lessons I've just now I'm starting to appreciate that I've learned. One was very simple: do the math. It's not difficult to do the plus and minus of cash going out and cash coming in, and I just can't be an optimist anymore. I'm very much a realist and maybe sometimes even pessimist. That I think a contract is supposed to hit in this day, and that will result in revenue in this day, and then I always apply a risk factor to that. But I certainly really to the tactics. I maintain a 30 to 60 day cash flow that I review weekly with my accountant. I look long term at an annual operating plan, and then some of the things that we did in the moment before I knew to really start watching these things. The RIF was hard but necessary. We've also gone through furloughs where we put staff temporarily without pay, but with the promise of a job many weeks or months afterwards. Debt is an option sometimes. More frequently, it's working with vendors on, hey, I can't pay you when I thought I could, or in some cases, we had to renegotiate contracts like with our property manager on when we could pay again. And I think we'll talk a bit about how important it is to have those conversations early, because once you're out of cash and you haven't told anyone how bad it's going to be, those conversations become far more unpleasant, far faster.
Right. And yet you can't be talking about it all the time early either. And so it's this fine line you have to walk. I'm excited to get into that more because there's a lot of lessons to unpack there. Andrew, what about you? Where were you when it felt like it started to unravel?
I don't know if there was like a gradual like build up, because in business ownership, there's always that like feeling of like uneasiness. Even when you have a lot of cash in the bank, there's always that like looming thought in the back of your head, like something could happen. Shit could hit the fan tomorrow, and it was much more of an immediate turn for me. And I'll never forget the day. It was Labor Day 2024. I was out in my backyard, and we were just redoing all of our landscaping at our house, and I was forming up for my dream office shed. I remember Damon built one during COVID, and it was freaking sick. And so it was like always like my goal to have an awesome office shed, and I was framing up for the concrete pad. and I got a phone call from my general manager, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like, it's the day off for like the technician side of the business, and our biggest client on the commercial cleaning side was Vail Resorts, and of course hospitality management. Like they're open all year round, even on holidays. So I'm like, okay, so maybe something weird is happening up there. And so I answered the call, and I just had this like pit in my stomach. And he's like, "Hey, did you see the email from Vail?" And I just was like, oh, "No, just tell me." And he's like, "They've put in their 30-day notice today."
And Andrew,
And
what percent of your business would you like? This sounds like a big customer, your biggest customer.
yep. So when I first acquired it, they were 90% of revenue. And at that point,
Wow.
they were closer to probably 60% of the revenue. So we grinded it out and got that down, but it was still a massive hunk, right? Like that's what was paying my debt service. And I immediately like sprinted into my house, started calling the two contacts that we had at Vail to see like what was going on, what was happening. Because I was blindsided. I really had no idea that they were feeling this way. There was no precursor conversations as to like, hey, we need to adjust some things and fix them within the next 30 to 60 days, or we're going to have to talk about contract termination. Like that never happened. Which I thought I had bought enough goodwill with them, doing all the things that we do as business owners for those clients, jazz games, dinners, lunches. How about cleaning one of their wedding day venue for them for free? Doing those things to buy that goodwill. Not saying that totally eliminates the chance of losing business, but it buys you some leeway if things aren't going well. And I was sprinting up to Park City, and finally one of them called me back. We had a little conversation. It was just like all this stuff kind of regurgitated on me, really. And luckily I was able to negotiate like, hey, let's have some meetings. Let's see if we can fix some of the concerns you have, or all the concerns. And we did that. And over the next 2 weeks, I thought we were heading in that direction, but ultimately they decided to terminate. And that was the first domino that fell and kind of sending us in a death spiral.
Thanks for pausing, because I do want to kind of keep moving through, but I and we'll get back to that part of the story in a second. But maybe to follow on, clearly you came into the acquisition knowing there was risk, 90% of revenue coming from one customer.
Yep.
How were you thinking about that? And just you knew that is a moment that could happen. Hopefully, never did. But clearly you got comfortable with it in the acquisition, and you worked it down towards 60% by diversifying your revenue. Will you just help us understand how you got past that hump and how you were managing that day to day, that risk?
Yeah. So I had a really good network in the commercial real estate side of things, and probably went into it a little bit more arrogantly than I should have. And once I started having those conversations, I quickly learned that just because I know the peoples whose last name is on the buildings and own the real estate does not correlate to them making decisions. And in fact, they are very far removed from those types of decisions. And so that was a strategy of mine that didn't pan out, as well as some verbal agreements with some people within my circle to help me accomplish that goal. Those also did not materialize. So I definitely put the cart in front of the horse with assuming and getting comfortable with that amount of risk. And also, kind of like you discussed in the opening, um, we all kind of vaguely acknowledge that there's risk and that this could fail, but we're also very confident in our abilities, and it's not going to happen to me. There's no way.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that like paranoia, right? Of like how much of that paranoia is healthy paranoia versus how much of that is like when things do start to slide,
Right.
knowing that we're headed in a bad spot. How do you get out in front of that? Andrew, we'll get into some lessons learned in a second and some reflections, and we'll pick back up on that story in a minute. But Damon, I want to get you in on this. At some point, business was good. When did it start to go differently?
Yeah. So just kind of backing up, we primarily shipped insulation and kind of moved that around the country, sold out of different suppliers, warehouses, and we had a pretty good lead engine. So actually, when I took over the business, throughout the entire time I owned it, we had like the number one SEO for insulation supplier. Just that term, that keyword, insulation supplier. The guy I bought it from had really, really great experience in SEO. He used to just specialize in doing that for like HVAC and plumbing companies locally. And so he just applied that to this. And so we had such a good lead flow that I wasn't really even worried about the customer concentration because it came to light right before we closed. They had acquired a new customer in 2021. That was a home builder. They manufactured homes, like that you see moving on the freeway. And so they had this massive, and they were getting just insane margins, right? Because there was an insulation shortage. So their primary supplier wasn't able to come up with it because they were bigger and bought all their inventory in bulk and brought it from overseas and then just kind of let it sit there and they would sell off that. So once they were out of that, this home manufacturer was looking for I would say, more dynamic supplier. And so that's when the former owner stepped in. And so all of 2021, they were buying just insane amounts of insulation for projects. And I had a purchase price that kind of didn't reflect their revenue as much. Because if you were to put in their revenue, it would have been like I was buying their profit from that customer. It would have been like I was getting the business for 1.5x. Like that's how much money they just poured in 2021. And so I didn't necessarily anticipate that to continue, but I thought I would be able to keep a portion of it or maybe some of it. And then about 2 months into buying the business, they just were like, "Oh yeah, our former supplier has it. It's a better price. It's all this. We'll let you know if we need something." On top of that, the relationship was strained because the former owner didn't necessarily keep the best records, and so there were some invoices that they had paid on and never received material for, and then you got a customer coming back to you asking for material on an invoice, and you're like, well, technically we're a different business entity, so I don't really know what to tell you. And so that just soured the relationship. But we had so many steady customers and so much volume that I was like, all right, well, instead of making this much, we'll make maybe 2/3 of that, whatever. We'll be fine.
And so, Damon, this is also a customer concentration issue, similar to Andrew. Give us a snapshot of makeup and what the business was like before they walked away.
Yeah. So you're looking at like before if you take out their revenue, it's anywhere from $350,000 to $400,000 in EBITDA. If you add them in, you're looking at $650,000 to $700,000 in EBITDA. I purchased the business for $1.1 million, and so I thought, without them, we're still making money. With them, we're great. And my plan was to start selling drywall the same way that we sell insulation.
Expand horizontally with
exactly. Yeah, we already have these customers. They're buying these things for these projects. If you're buying insulation, you're going to need baseboards. You're going to need all this other stuff.
It's a great strategy.
Good idea in theory, right? Good idea in theory. The issue is we didn't have great costs because we weren't buying that stuff as much from our suppliers. And so you kind of have to start at ground zero with these suppliers in those different categories. Things really went sour, though, I would say, when interest rates started to increase. Was that maybe April of 2022? I noticed a pretty significant drop in the amount of projects we were getting. People were taking out fewer HELOCs. Our primary customer was like a guy with 2 or 3 trucks and, Joe homeowner who was trying to do it himself, trying to save some money. So we competed directly with Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards and all those big brands because we could get it for 30% cheaper. And so we had a little pocket there to make some revenue. So once that shortage of insulation and building materials that we all kind of saw during COVID started to disappear, Home Depot and Lowe's had a lot of stock. I didn't carry any stock, which is a blessing and a curse when prices increase immediately. And so a 10% increase on me, I feel it the first of the month. Home Depot doesn't feel it for 3 or 4 months. And then they can try to get your job in other ways, right? And so over the course of 2022, I saw things kind of start to go down. I went back into tech and got a job as a sales rep at a small startup to, pay my family's bills, and then the business was going to cover itself. So I think it's like I say, bankruptcy happens gradually and then suddenly. I think that's there's like a famous quote that I'm butchering, but
Well, no, you nailed it. It's actually an Ernest Hemingway quote on how his character ran out of money slowly and then all at once.
Yeah, slowly and then all at once. And so I think I had a panic attack pretty much every day. Like legit, can't see, it's hot and I'm sweating. And then you kind of calm yourself down and get back to it. My entire life ended up falling apart in 2023, which made the business kind of feel a little bit better. But without getting into too many personal details, I was able to, by the end of 2023, be at a place where I realized, okay, let's not throw any more good money at this. Let's not throw any more good time at this. Let's shut this baby down and see if we can, recover. And luckily I bought the business when I was I was 29, I think, when I bought it. And so I was like, yeah, I'm still pretty young. I can recover. And that's kind of the story. The fraud, which we can get into later, started hitting the beginning of 2023. People were buying good material with bad credit cards, getting it shipped to a random Zillow location, and then basically smuggling it back under the border and then selling it. This happened to me. I was getting about anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 worth of this almost every single day for 3 months with no way to stop it. I tried, aside just shutting down operations. So I ran through that as much as I possibly could, and we had made enough money to where I was okay. Like we had enough, cash flow for the end of 2022 to kind of survive. But the beginning of 2023, the cracks really started to show. So, yeah.
What a 1-2 punch. So you lose a key customer that you had already underwritten. What would happen if we lost this customer? But you lose the customer, and then the fraud starts to kick in.
Yeah, and very much like Andrew, I'm an optimist. Like I just think I can do anything. And so I just thought, oh, it's one customer was this much. How hard can it be to go out and get one more big customer? It turns out very hard, very hard. And also they're not very good. Like those huge customers are not great to have. Like they don't pay very well. They've got a lot of people courting them. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I should try to get 5 small customers. And then you're just constantly wondering who is your perfect customer in this like weird little niche business.
I want to give the listener kind of a glimpse into what it's like being in these turbulent moments. Damon, you hinted at the panic attacks. And I want to talk about the personal component too, but maybe let's get to that in a minute. I instead want to just kind of paint a picture of what is it like as a business operator in those moments? What are some of the hardest calls, Caroline, that maybe you had to make? What's it like to operate a business that's just not working the way that you expected it to when you acquired it? What were some of those days like? And after you've maybe given us a glimpse of that, will you kind of fast forward a little bit and tell us kind of in between those hard times of today, kind of how you navigated that?
So what it's like in the moment, boy, is it an awful, horrible thing hard to describe, because you hear about the whole it's lonely at the top and all that, and that's fine. It's catchy, but what is so hard to capture is that there's nothing you can't talk to your employees because you don't want to cry wolf, because you might be able to pull out of this, and they don't deserve the angst. They did not buy a business. They should get their paycheck and they should get their work, and they shouldn't have to carry their emotional turmoil. So you can't reach out to them. You can't warn them. Same with vendors, same with your bank. You don't want to cry wolf if it's maybe not quite there yet. And so there's just this sort of like, what do I do? And you can pull a few levers quietly and try and kind of right the ship. And to be honest, we're doing this all the time. Every day you're pulling these levers. So you're right to assume you probably can pull out of this, because you've pulled out of a million things every other week. It just hasn't blown up, so it didn't feel as big. And so there's all this kind of little course corrections you're making in the company. There is the personal horrendous things you're going through. Damon's right. The panic attacks, that's like 101 with being a business owner. I full blown insomnia now. I had all the weird physical ailments that came of it. A whole bunch of weird stuff your body starts doing when you have a stress that you just can't resolve. And the other thing is, I'm sure every one of us has like fantasized of like, I'll just walk away. I'm just done. I'm not gonna. I don't wanna. And you can't, because if you give a little damn about your employees, the last thing you want to do is leave them stranded. It's not their fault. So you feel the guilt of I can't walk away. And I actually like a lot of our customers, which is weird. I never thought I would, but they're really good partners, and I don't want to leave them without a really reliable supplier. So you don't have any of the normal outlets that, like in a W-2, you can quit your job tomorrow. Might be unpleasant. You have to go find a new job, but you can get pissed off and quit, and it feels good. And you can't do that when you own a business. There's no fun outlet like that. There's the dangerous outlets that many of us have seen or maybe even gone down that path before, be it alcohol or narcotics, to try and deal with this pain. You will try anything, and nobody warns you about that kind of extreme emotional turmoil and what it does to your mental state and how you roll through it. And then, Chase, did you want me to go through how do you come out of that?
Maybe let's stay in this in the
The
headspace
darkness.
for a little bit, and I want to hear from you, Andrew. Like, did that resonate? Were you experiencing similar things?
I remember my first panic attack, and like it, oh my goodness, it was next level. And I was fortunate that I had a very close friend of mine nearby who just grabbed me and held me tight, and I'm sobbing. I feel like there's this like black hole in my chest, and like everything is like sucking in. um that was tough. And then, yeah, I mean, just the knowing who is the appropriate outlet to talk to sometimes is tough, because there's the people who can help you, and those are sometimes, like Caroline mentioned, people that you don't want to cry wolf to too soon, banks, or partners, or the sellers from a seller's note, or whatever. But I think it's also, it's healthy to talk to other people, and I did not do that right away off the bat. I'll plug Damon again. When things really started to like go bad for me, we didn't have a relationship beyond we had tweeted at each other a handful of times. He shot me his number, and we had like a 30-minute phone call on a random Saturday, and he made himself available to me because he knew exactly what I was going through. So I think that's key at finding who can you talk to that can offer actual real help. Um, and but I just wish my company was not big enough that I had a we'll call it big boy leadership team that you can rely on in these difficult times. The individual that I had hired, great individual, love him to death. He wasn't prepared for or mentally up to the challenge of understanding the difficulty that we were going through, and being there with me shoulder to shoulder to pull us out. And I probably divulged too much to him. And that's when I started to notice things just were getting worse, because he wasn't that type of person that's just like, okay, things are hard, let's double down and let's claw back out of this. Like, I'm not faulting him. It's just that wasn't his personality.
So the
Um,
lonely at the top was real for you. There literally wasn't anyone else at the top alongside you. What were some of the hardest calls you had to make, Andrew? You lost a key customer immediately. There goes 60% of your revenue. What were you trying to scrape toward at the time? What was your focus at that moment?
Obviously, I can't remember the name of the book, but in one of my peer groups, someone mentioned, "Hey, you need to read this book." But it's basically like fending off bankruptcy as a business owner, and these are all the things that you need to do prior to going down that path. And like the first step is just trimming fat, right? So going through the bank statement, seeing like what are the fluffy things that we can cut out, where we have technicians that are just kind of like hanging out, like that ended, like you either on the job and clocked in, or if you have no job, you're clocked out, you're going home for the day. Like no more hanging out at the shop, cleaning trucks and getting paid for it. Like that was done. But the two most difficult conversations I had to have was with my general manager, and I had to decrease his salary. What do you do? You know, we just lost 60% of our revenue, and I wasn't taking a paycheck at all, zero. And I was like, I want you to have some skin in the game. And then the second one was obviously a bulk of our team worked at Vail, and we just lost that contract. And so I had to go to the team lead, who was fantastic. I loved her to death. She was amazing. One of my most favorite employees. I had to go to her house and have a really difficult conversation with her, because not only was her job being impacted, but her husband worked for us as well. And she brought in her whole entire team from Vail, was all her contacts, that now she had to pass down the line like, hey guys, we're out of work. And like, oh, just gut wrenching. And if you have a soul, it is so hard to do, you know, and lots of tears were shed, and there's a lot of guilt. Like, this is my fault.
Thank you, Andrew. Damon, how do you describe what it's like to be in this vortex when everything's going wrong? How do you describe it to others? What was it like for you?
I think like any business owner has a healthy amount of delusion, right? You've got to have it in order to even do it in the first place. But for me, it was, I felt it just all the time. It just kind of felt like almost just like a second person that was following me around, you know, just like the second I would start to enjoy something, whether it was playing with my kids or, you know, watching sports or hanging out with friends, it was like, hey, are you enjoying yourself? Have you forgotten that like your business is in a very dire spot? You should be feeling bad about it and stressed about it.
Or working.
Or working.
Are you?
Yeah, exactly. And
I've never heard someone describe it as a second person following me around. That resonates.
yeah, it's like, you know, they're with you all the time, and the second you wake up, they're tapping you on the shoulder. Hey, you should check and see this or that, or reply to this email, or, you know, talk to this person, and they're just kind of always there. And what I was grappling with quite a few different things at the same time, but for me, I think it mostly just manifested in like complete isolation, just isolating myself from everybody that I really could, just because it felt like maybe easier to do that. I would occasionally drop a bit here or there to people, but for the most part, I just kind of wrestled with it. And I think there was a part of me that believed that if I just doubled down, if I just cared more, if I just hustled a little bit harder, then these wouldn't have been an issue. Or, it's like the 5 stages of grief, you know, you start bargaining. You're like, well, if I do this, if I hadn't bought the business, or if I had done this. And the irony of all of this is the thing that led me to my business was I was trying to buy the business Andrew bought. We were looking at the same business, and he got under contract right before I could strike. So when Andrew called me and they were like, he talked to me about his business, I was like, oh wow, like it's not me necessarily. It's just kind of in some ways luck of the draw. And not sorry, Andrew, that you brought me some peace, but a little bit like, just like, hey, you know, there are things outside of my control. There are things inside of my control. But yeah, you're kind of having it follow you around, and it's just a second person that's just tapping you on the shoulder at any moment, letting you know that, hey, you should be tight. You should be real stressed right now.
I'm trying to picture, Damon, you've lost your key customer, similar to Andrew, 60% plus of your revenue goes away. And fraud's kicking in. You're trying to play that game of whack-a-mole on like which orders are real, which revenue is real that I can bet,
Absolutely.
which
Yeah.
revenue is going to get pulled out of my account. What were some of those harder calls you had to make? How are you navigating during some of those more turbulent times?
I was like starving my vendors essentially. I was paying the minimum as much as I possibly could to get them to release orders. Right. That's also like the spigot for revenue was, hey, I need to ship orders, but you're not going to ship them unless I pay. And so it was a constant kind of battle. And I was pretty good. To be honest, we should have failed long before we did. Um, I'm a little bit proud that we were able to run it out as long as we did because we should have failed a lot earlier. But yeah, it was mostly like, hey, I always made sure that I could pay. I had like a small team in the Philippines, made sure that they were taken care of. Those expenses were so minimal compared to the fraud that it was like, hey, we'll find the money for that. But yeah, it was mostly just who's going to be pissed off at me this week. I'll let them be pissed off at me this week. I'll pay them on Friday or Monday, and then they'll be my friend for a few more days, and then that person will be pissed off at me. And so you're just kind of figuring out, and I had different suppliers, some of which were more helpful, some that were not as helpful. And so if you were a really helpful supplier, I was probably going to, stretch a little bit to make sure that my bills were a little more on time. And luckily I'd paid a lot of things. I was really good at paying things on time for the first, year and a half that I owned it, to where when things got a little bit sketchy, they offered me some grace, and I feel bad that, they were left holding the bag a little bit, but, I never intended. My thought on it always was, if I can make it to the next busy season, which typically was April through September, if I can make it to busy season and we start getting a high volume of orders, I can figure this out. And so when 2023 hits and we made it through the fraud by about May is when I was able to cut it down pretty much entirely. The numbers weren't there in terms of just customer revenue, just revenue. The numbers just weren't there to be able to ride it out any further. It's kind of the way things boiled down. But yeah, you make some tough calls, specifically, souring business relationships. Like it's, I was raised that, your word kind of means something. And it hurt me emotionally to like, be like, oh man, I'm getting this email for like a bill that I have to pay, but like, I've got to kind of push them for a couple of weeks. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling. Didn't like it.
We've talked about how like business ownership is just constant problem solving, even when it's going well. And like this question of like, when is this so bad that maybe we need to consider going a different path, maybe shutting it down? I'm curious to any one of you, how did you, or how do you continue to wrestle with that thought of, is this something worth pushing through, or have we reached a point of no return? Damon, you mentioned having pride and, ensuring you kind of got it to last longer than maybe others could have. But I almost wonder, like, would it have been wise for you personally to have shut it down then and not drag out the pain and the turmoil? And so I guess the question is just, how do you know when to pull out? Does anyone have a thought on that?
Well,
Sure.
I
Go
got
ahead,
to
Karen.
say it
Go
first,
ahead.
because I've had so many moments that were like, Damon, this thing should have died so long ago. It probably should have died the day we bought it. And the first time that we should have died, I was not ready. I was not ready, because that whole thing David was talking about, that voice in the back of your head or following you around, like, it was like, holy shit, I just graduated Wharton. I have had a pretty incredible career. I'm pretty resilient. I've gotten shot at, and it's okay. And I can't take this. And I was a little bit disappointed in myself. And so I turned to my partners on the first failure and said, look, I'm out of, this is it. I'm out. Like, I can't solve this. And that was the first time I realized, like, oh, you don't have to do this alone. Because both of them were, I wouldn't say like dancing around and happy and like they had the solution, but they caught me when I fell and were ready to work through the problem together. What a wonderful idea. Like, actually trust your teammates, was the first hard lesson. And then I think getting punched in the face over and over, you start to recognize when those swings are coming and how to start ducking. And so that decision point of, is this it? Should I pull out? I think you have a little more confidence. Like Damon mentioned, he should have gone under, but he knew that there were a few more ways he could kind of thwart this. And he should. Like, if you can get up one more time, I think it's worth trying. You will know, as both these guys know too well, when it's time, because either your marriage has fallen apart, your house is being taken from you, or your employees are leaving in mass. There will be signs that the ship has burned beyond repair. And if you have the strength and your mental fortitude is still intact, I think it's worth getting up again.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice for sure. Um, my I kind of had two inflection points in our situation. Once we the veil thing kind of the ship had sailed, and we knew that there was no saving that. We were able to defer our SBA loan. So just to clarify for the audience, so I did an SBA loan for the first acquisition, a 7A. And then on the second business purchase, we did a seller's note on that. So I immediately called the bank. They were very gracious and understanding and willing to work with me. And we put the loan into forbearance for, I think, 6 months. And I was like, okay, that alleviates like that debt payment. And we weren't a very like overhead heavy business. It was just the human capital basically is all we had. Um, and so then we turned to, okay, the carpet cleaning business. Like it was a strong 30-year-old tenured business in Park City. When I first acquired it, that phone would not stop ringing. And I'm like, okay, this is going to save us. Like we can double down. There was no marketing that was happening with this business. It was all through some good SEO that they had. And that was it. So I'm like, okay, if we actually go on the offensive with marketing and we hire another one or two techs, I should be able to cover the debt payments and we can start building off of that. And up to this point, I was pretty hands off in the day to day, in the weeds of the business. I was being told that everything was hunky dory. I would check the bank account, and we had, I was the one that was I'd oversee payroll, but I wasn't actually initiating it and completing payroll. We had money in the bank, so I thought things were okay. Um, but then like the revenue really started dropping and I started looking at the year prior's revenue within the carpet cleaning business and that had been slashed by 50%. And so I was just like, what in the world is going on? And come to find out that the one of the employees that came with that business, we had fired. He had been with the company for 17 years, but he was we had some fraud too, kind of the 1-2 punch here with us. He was using company vehicles and equipment and doing some moonlighting work, and then also talking smack on us to our other customers. And because he had this 17-year relationship with all these commercial clients up in Park City, when we fired him, he subsequently turned around and stole all of them. And so that revenue had been slashed. And so that was kind of the second inflection point. And we went through, and of course, this always happens during the holidays, right? Like, what's the holidays without some additional stress? And my wife and I were just having every night just this like, shout out to my wife, Amanda, first and foremost, just a stellar rock star foundation of our family. And everyone always asks you when you're going through this, like, is your marriage okay? And I can tell everyone with positively, like, there's never been an issue. She's been there to hold me up at every step of the way and very supportive through this. But it was coming back to the same conversation every night. There's just like, there's nothing we can do. I tried calling the sellers on the seller's note to see if they would forbear their payment and give us 6 months to figure things out. And that was just a hard no, which is just terrible business decision. Looking back, hindsight's always 2020. They're I'm not sure if there's like a gag order or anything. We're in the middle of our bankruptcy right now, so I don't know how much I could say on the details. They probably not going to be too happy. But when you go from, we were 150 to 175K a month down to 10, the math just isn't mathing at that point. And it's like, okay, the only solution is for me to jump in and be that chuck in the truck. And at that point, I'm just a slave to the debt. And the night, it was maybe a week before Christmas, we decided that it's time to pull the plug. Just this massive stress was just off of our shoulders, and we're like, dang it, maybe we should have made this call like 6 months ago. But
Well, in your defense, you didn't, because you had personally guaranteed some of the debt. I mean, you had a lot on the line at
everything was
the
PG.
point where tapping out felt better because the current reality was that bad. But I think in your defense, you had a lot at stake. I don't know how much you're comfortable sharing or kind of why that was the last call for you to make. But will you talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, we're fighting for our house. I wish I was in Texas where there was some better homesteading laws. But we're fighting for our house, fighting for everything that me and my wife had spent the last 4 or 5 years building together. Like, we did not seek out external financing for the down payments of any of these loans. That was through our own sweat equity and savings. And so it's hard to get back to that point. And so you're trying to salvage all that hard work that you did. And similar to, this is the pride aspect of it as well, just saying, oh, I can pull through this. But my mental health had deteriorated so bad that it was, substances were becoming a problem. And I'm just like, I'm not going to be that person. Like, I got 3 little kids. Vulnerable moment here. You start to look at, hey, I got enough life insurance policies that will make all this go away. Take care of my family.
Yeah, and Andrew, I mean, yeah, your mind goes to really dark places, and we talked about that. We talked about that a lot. Just like your importance as a dad supersedes your importance as a business owner. And I think it's one of the great things about living in the United States is that we can take these risks. As much as I am bitter about what happened to me, I found myself in very similar positions that Andrew was in. And so I think for me, like, I think you should make every single move you possibly can to save your business. You need to make every single move you possibly can until you get to a point where the trade-off. I feel like if you can't look yourself in the eye and say this new idea could actually work, once you get to that point where you can't honestly tell yourself, your investor, whoever it is, you can't honestly take any more money and try to save this thing or save yourself, I think that's the moment to walk away and call it a draw. You know, I think that's it's hard to do though because it feels really bad. It's not fun.
And I did have the opportunity to sell a portion of my business to the firm that I was working with, but they were still interested in moving forward. But in good conscience, I knew that I could not allow that to happen because I knew that it was so far down the path gone that they would be lighting, $250,000 on fire. And I had relationships with these guys that I needed to maintain. And even though they assured me, hey, it's business, this is what we do, there's always a risk you're going to lose your money. I'm like, yeah, but I know it's not going to work out and I'm not going to do that to you guys. So there was an easy off ramp for me that probably would have changed some of the personal risk and potentially save my home, but just my integrity didn't allow me to do that. And I'm like, it's time to wash my hands and be done, for my mental health, for the future of my family, for the stress that it was putting my wife under. And the plus side to all this is I did set up my team lead. I allowed her to maintain the few contracts that we had, and taught her and her husband the carpet cleaning side of the business, and so they were able to spin something up so like not everyone got screwed in this entire process, and they're doing pretty well from what I've heard. We haven't talked to them for a bit, but they're doing well for themselves.
I appreciate each of you opening up about what it was like personally and emotionally. I'm just always floored at how personally we take moments like this and how dark they get. Because by contrast, and the way we opened this up, is most businesses do fail. It's just kind of how it works. If you go back and look at publicly traded companies 100 years ago, most of them aren't, even big companies, they fail at some point. Either get acquired or, shift. Small businesses in particular have a higher failure rate. That's why they're valued much more affordably than larger companies. But, failure, people get it. And yet when you're in the hurricane, it feels so deeply personal and it feels so scary. And the word shame comes up, and taking it personally. I'm just curious why you feel that is, or maybe for someone who's listening who hasn't been there, what would you help them understand on why it feels so unique and so particularly scary, and not just like, oh, we're just one of those businesses that is going to fail?
I think Andrew hit two words that were important earlier. Soul. If you have a soul and you have an employee, who cares what the metrics are? Even if 99% businesses fail and you and your employee are staring each other in the eye saying, we know this was going to happen. If you know that person, you know their name, you know their family, that doesn't change the fact, especially if there's somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, which it sounds like all of us have those employees, this is going to hurt in a whole new way for them. They don't have maybe the resources or the opportunity that all of us on this phone call clearly have if we bought a business. And so for them, losing a job means they might not eat, or they might actually lose their home in reality. And so if you care a little bit, you really feel that deeply, and you can't change the fact that you feel 100% responsible. No matter what the numbers are about small business failures, you're the one steering the ship. You're the one that bought the company and made a promise, more or less, to them that you'd give them work and ensure their family is safe. And the other one that he talked about was arrogance. I've never thought of myself as an arrogant person. Maybe that's what all arrogant people feel like. But I think each one of us buy a business and think, not me. I'm smarter. I've been through whatever. I have resources, opportunity. I'll be different. And look at us now. So I think those are the two things that you think are going to work differently. But here we are.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Like, I feel like I've relitigated how things went down a million times, in my mind. What did I actually think? Did I have confidence in this? Did I think it was a good idea? Because I had my qualms about even moving forward prior to closing. And, I, thought about not buying it multiple times. But yeah, I think mostly, I was pretty well aware of my strengths, but also very well aware of my weaknesses, which are, I'm not like great with the numbers. I'm definitely not a measure twice, cut once person. I'm a let's keep cutting until we get to the right level. And so I was, I think I carried a lot of that. Like, well, I could have done X, Y, and Z differently. And it's like, yeah, but you made the best decision at the time. And I still feel like I didn't do anything financially irresponsible. So I felt like, once I got through it, I could kind of move past it. But you carry a lot of the shame because, like, I had 3 kids. I still have 3 kids, but I had a very young baby, and that was born right after I closed on the business. And so I just kind of like, I remember, just feeling like, man, I have jeopardized their future, their comfort, all this stuff because I bought this stupid business. And like, Now, instead of stockpiling money away in a 529 so that they can have a great education, I'm going to be just trying to dig out of a hole. And, you think about that, the sacrifice on time and all those other things. And then you also see other people that have made different choices that are succeeding. And you're like, why am I so stupid? And so you carry it so personally because it affects everything around you. The thing that I always think about is, if you are watching a basketball game and a shooter takes like a pretty bad shot, but it goes in and everybody wins or their team wins, everybody's like, oh, that was a great, what a gutsy play. What a gutsy play. Patrick Mahomes, he weaves through three defenders and flips it, with one hand, and, Travis Kelce runs it in for a touchdown and the Chiefs win. Everyone's excited. But at the same time, he flips that and it gets ran back for a pick six. Suddenly that's a dumb play. And so I think that's the big thing is like we carry these decisions so personally, but we have to just kind of trust that whoever that person was who made that decision, the past version of you, they weren't trying to screw future you. They just kind of ended up that way.
Yeah. Caroline, you're in a unique spot compared to Andrew Damon in that you're on a rebound moment. You're fighting through this last kind of moment where the company's existence was at risk, and you're growing through it. I would love each of you to maybe describe where you're at today, and Andrew and Damon, for you two in particular. Like, I kind of almost wanted personally to avoid the topic of like, what was it like closing it? We don't like talking about that. And so it's not talked about a lot. But I'm curious, just what was it like shutting the company down? But maybe Caroline, in your example, what's it like fighting for it again? And tell us a little bit about where you're at today.
This is an unfair thing to say, but I almost feel I don't want to say it. I'm worse off because I feel like I'm in purgatory still. At least Andrew and Damon know.
I feel for you.
Thank you. Like they know how that particular story ended, and now, but to be fair, they went through hell, and I don't envy them that. But so I'm sitting in this position now where I've been 3 really big moments in the company where we should have or may have gone under. And now we're doing a capital raise. We've got partners that are really rallying behind us with some really big contracts. Like things are looking great. And everybody I talk to says, oh, your company is, wow, so impressive. You're making all the great plays. And I'm sitting here with the memory and the scars and maybe still gushing wounds of these failures thinking, yeah, it might be okay right now. That second person's right behind me saying, yeah, you go ahead and get confident and see what happens. And so I'm just waiting for the next shoe to drop, which I hope there's a portion of business ownership that isn't that, but maybe that's, I need to ask somebody who's been in it 20 years, Chase. Does the pain ever stop? Does the scary feeling ever stop? And so I'm optimistic, but I'm always looking over my shoulder, which I think makes maybe a better business owner, better CEO, that I'm always kind of getting ready for the next fight and trying to forestall it from impacting the employees again. So it's all good, but I know better than to get excited and try and ride high.
Thank you, Caroline. We're definitely rooting for you, but I think you speak to something that maybe is often overlooked of like, yeah, you're in the hard part of still just scratching, and the uncertainty and the hope and the optimism, but also the fear. And yeah, we can hear that in your voice. Andrew?
Yeah. So everyone's going to get a nice perspective. We have Caroline, who's on the upswing. I'm right in the thick of it. Damon's on the tail end of it. So everyone should have a good flavor of what the process is like. And so we officially filed our paperwork at the end of August. And we have our first meeting of the debtors September 29th. And so just to outline some details, because again, this is something that not a lot of people understand or know about the process and what happens. And so you file 30 days after you file, you go before the judge, who I believe they're also the trustee, right, Damon? The judge?
Not necessarily, but they can be. Yeah.
Okay. And so basically that is an opportunity for your debtors to show up to this meeting and state their claim as to why they should not be included in the bankruptcy. they'll take a look at your assets, and then the judge will say, okay, like you got to fork over XYZ, you got to sell this, whatever that may be, that gets distributed proratably to your debtors after that. And then 60 days after that is when everything gets discharged, and you can kind of wipe your hands of it, be clean, and walk away. So September 29th will be our meeting. 60 days after that, things will be discharged, and we can formally start to move on. But like winding the business down, it's been bittersweet. Like obviously I'm like ready to like get things done, but there's also like all these like little administrative things that it's just it's ridiculous. Like I still need to file some quarterly taxes, and that's not my cup of tea. And so like trying to figure that out, even though there's zeros, it's just a hassle that I still have to do it. And so it's been annoying. Those are like the little things that nag me in the back of my mind now. But on the flip side, it's been an amazing 9 months almost since we started this process. I have 3 little boys, and I've got to spend a ton of time with them. And that's been a huge blessing and kind of a silver lining to all this, coupled with all the business lessons that I learned along the way. But mainly just like um, excited for the future and the unique perspective that I have now on life. And um, I forgot who said this, but a wallet once expanded will never shrink. And I view stress tolerance is the same. Your stress tolerance continues to stretch and stretch and stretch. And I'm like, okay, we've just done something and gone through something that probably less than 2 or 3% of the population will ever experience. And if we can make it through that, like we can make it through anything. And life is all about tests and trials, and some people have to learn different lessons. And if you're trying to create or raise somebody to be patient, to be humble, or grateful, like you're not just going to give them everything at the drop of a hat. And I feel like I'm probably in that bucket. And so it's been an amazing learning experience for me.
Andrew, thanks for sharing. Before we get to Damon, I just have a follow-on question of just bankruptcy is such a scary word, right? It's just scary to say. Yet there's like a really beautiful component to it, right? Is like the ability to get a fresh start, and the fact that we have a legal system that has said like, we want you back out on the field. We
Yep.
want entrepreneurs back out building. We want to give you the opportunity to start over. But then I also think about like one of the moments I remember just most acutely from your experience, Andrew, is when we got coffee and you talked about at the time, the advice you were getting was go buy the next few sizes in clothing for your kids, go get food storage, go, and that's scary. And you know, it's just such a heavy burden personally. And so on one hand, it's got this beautiful component to it, but on the other hand, it's just ugly and scary. Can I ask you to just talk a little bit about how you view the word bankruptcy and how you navigated the beauty of a fresh start, but then the real challenges of accounts being frozen? Or I'm not sure what transpired for you.
So luckily the accounts being frozen thing really didn't happen until recently, because we were so defaulted at that point. And my wife, who's a school teacher, her paycheck went into that account, even though we had changed her direct deposit, and the bank immediately just like gobbled it all up. And we were like, oh, and luckily we had already filed our paperwork. So once you file your paperwork, your debtors are not allowed to collect on payments. And so luckily we were able to get that back. But one of the other beautiful lessons that we've learned is like we can live a pretty basic life and be very happy. Cutting out the Disney Plus, the Netflix, the swim lessons for the kids, like in the moment is super disappointing, and you're like feeling like, dang it, like I failed my kid. But also it forced us to like turn inward as a family, and we don't need to be watching TV. Like, let's go outside and play. Um, like there's this thing that we're always trying to keep up with everybody, all the subscriptions and the knickknacks and paddywhacks, and it gets stressful managing all that. And so it's been just a beautiful opportunity to simplify our life.
Hmm.
And while becoming a pseudo prepper, I guess, so to speak, has been a little weird. We have way too many safety nets around us in today's society, whether that's religious organizations or family members. I have had, you guys, just some phenomenal friends who have done some amazing sacrifices on our behalf. And I don't know if I can ever repay them for that.
Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. Damon, we want to hear from you, of course, and then I want to talk for maybe 5 or 6 minutes on lessons learned before we wrap up. Damon, what about for you?
Yeah. First thing you do, if you're listening to this, you're like, hey, I think that I'm ready. You think you're ready? Don't pay another supplier, another vendor, another anybody, anything. Pay your employees, nobody else. Any payment you make in those 30 to 90 days that you're leading up to file are going to come under scrutiny, and it's just going to make the whole process slow down. Even if you're doing it honestly, it's going to come under scrutiny. So I was unwinding a marriage and a business at the same time. I was going through,
Wow.
frankly, it was a lot. It was a lot. That was the year of attorney fees, as I like to call it. They say marriage is grand, but divorce is 20 grand. So just kind of stepping back to that, my process took a really long time because I had to figure out assets of the marriage, assets of the business, all of that kind of slowing down. My ex-wife still lives in the house. She was able to, have somebody else buy it out and kind of work something out. So my kids still live in the same house with their mom. So it's actually, that was probably the thing I felt the most worry about, was just displacing them. And like, now they've got new friends and a new school, and I felt really bad about that. So that being able to like work out, props to her for being able to work that out. But I still had to wait 90 more days now that I'm off the title of the house and it got sold. And I had to explain that, hey, I didn't get to take any of that equity. Like it delayed the process. So I tried to file about 3 times before it finally went through. And I'm discharged now. So I'm very excited about that, but stop paying people, talk to an attorney, and then just look at your options. So if a 13 makes sense and you're able to preserve some of your assets, I say go for it. In my case, since I was going to be looking for a new line of work anyways, and my business was ending, I was able to do a 7, which is kind of quick and dirty once it actually goes through. You do kind of get a fresh start, but it's going to be really hard to borrow money for a while. My car recently died, so that was a headache, things you have to unwind. So those are more like logistics that you have to learn to work through. But like Andrew said, your stress tolerance goes up, and you also kind of realize what's important. For me, I've just determined that after all was said and done, I still loved the same music that I still loved. I still had my friends. I still had my family. Now, like, I realize those things are the point. Like, whatever I do professionally from here is going to support those things, not detract from those things. And I have a W-2 that I love. I work for a software company doing implementations and logistics, and it's awesome. And things that I learned in my business have really aided me in this job. And, it's a good path for me. And so it's a simplified path made complex by, the things that I learned along the way. But yeah.
Damon, you can hear the relief in your voice. I can just hear the levity, and just you're further along through this. And so
it's nice. It's nice. It sucks sometimes, but it's nice.
Yes. Yeah. I can see that. I could see that for sure. As we wrap up here, I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about lessons learned. I think you all have done a very noble thing, which is get on here and talk about this openly, which I think you're not inclined to do. You talked about the shame, Damon, and kind of withdrawing, and instead you guys are choosing to come and talk about this, and for the benefit, as I've talked with each of you individually, each of you are doing this for the benefit of others or a previous self who maybe you wish you would have heard this, a few years ago. I'm just curious, what comes to mind in terms of lessons learned? If you could go back and do something differently, or if you could just stress something to someone listening, what would that be?
Man, I think I just don't think buying a business is a good fit for most businesses and most people. I don't think it's bad in general, but I think I don't think it's a terrible path, and it can work. But I think you've got to have a really good plan, and it's got to really fit your skill set. It's got to really fit the industry, the location, your lifestyle. You got to make sure your marriage is intact before you do this. You got to make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think more so than even just find the right business, it's just do you want to buy a business, or do you want to sell businesses? Do you want to be a business broker? I wanted to be a business broker. In reality, that's what I learned. It's I wanted to sell businesses. I wanted to get in the nitty gritty and look at all the potential things with a buyer who's then going to go do that. And so I think understanding why you're doing it, making sure it fits a specific thing that only you can do. Only you're going to be able to make this business worth 3-5x, whatever you're trying to do. And then on top of that, it's just understanding your own limitations, your skill set, bringing in a team if you need a team. And honestly, I would go as big as I possibly could, because if you're going to lose it all, you're going to lose it all in $1 million business. You're going to lose it all in a $6 million business. Go as big as you can. And having lots of revenue is a profit heals all wounds in business, Yeah.
Great advice.
The takeaways.
Caroline, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'll give some grace to earlier Caroline. I think she's damn. Like Damon said, you made the best decisions you could with the information you had. And even if I could rewind the clock, other than not buy the damn business, there's not a lot else I could have done that really would have changed things greatly. It just would have changed how the pain manifested. So instead, let me talk to the two groups I think that would probably be listening to this. The first is the potential CEO, owner, thinking about coming into this, buying a business, starting a business. David made some of the points. You got to have your ducks in a row before you do this. And that might mean if you are in a relationship, that relationship is stable. If you're, family, or you're living somewhere, that needs to be pretty solid. And your mental space needs to be pretty solid. I thought mine was until I went through the ringer and I had to really get mental help. I had to get coaching. I had to get physical help. There was a lot of things that broke down despite being ready. So you need to be in a mental space ready to take on this load, because just assume you are not Steve Jobs. This is going to go poorly. You just don't know how yet, but you need to be ready for that. So there's that group. Then there's maybe the group that's listening. And God, I hope there's none that are like where Andrew was, but it happens, I think, more frequently than people admit. And I kudos to Andrew for telling the truth. You do think about that other option. And if you are in that, oh my God, call somebody. Call one of us, but probably more importantly, call a trusted family or a friend who knows you, who can remind you you're not that person. You are in a very stressful and a very dark place, and you just aren't capable of seeing that the world is better and there are options and there are things out there that are going to be better for you. So call somebody, have some advisor, get out of your own head, get away. You're not your friendliest person right now. And then there are the tactical things. There's 1,000 things you can do if you are still capable and mentally able. There are a lot of decisions you can make. You can choose the pecking order of who gets paid, who doesn't. We can probably talk you through tactics all day. And from that, I'd say, I think that kind of wraps it up. Is get help if you can. Tactically do what you can until you can't anymore, and then make sure you make the healthy decision for yourself and your family.
Thank you, Caroline. Andrew, what comes to mind for you?
There's a lot of noise out there in the ETA space, and a lot of people, excuse me, who benefit from just putting kind of generic blanket covering content out there and saying things like, oh, if you're tired of your W-2, just buy a business. Wow, what awful advice. terrible advice. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. So having the the intelligence to identify that, why you're doing it. Are you doing this to thump your chest and say, I'm a business owner? Or are you doing this because you actually do have an advantage to acquire this business and turn it up and get a return of 1, 2, 3, 4x on it? And come into it with some experience in that industry. I really admire Caroline's path. She did not buy a pool construction company. She bought something that she has some ties to and has a competitive advantage being in. She understands the industry. And there are some businesses that are more, fairly simple, commercial cleaning. But again, I quickly found out that there's a lot of nuances within that industry. It's a relationship industry, and it very similar sales cycle. It's not like go hunt out $100,000 MRR account and land it in a month. No, that's with you're doing that. It's going to take 8 to 12 months probably to land accounts like that. And so, understanding your buy box and what are the things that you are looking for, and being very hard on scrutinizing opportunities in deals within that buy box. And Reed Tileston is phenomenal of talking about your buy box as an ETA person. And don't compromise. Open the kimono, because at the end of the day, if you're like find yourself rationalizing too many things, the likelihood of your failure is probably doubling with every rationalization you make up to that point. And similar to what Damon said, bigger the better. If you're buying anything sub probably 2 million in revenue, you're going to be wearing all the hats, and your stress level is going to be through the roof. As soon as you kind of creep past that 2 million mark, you can bring in some professional help, maybe not an entire C-suite, but maybe an operations manager, have a fractional CFO. You just have the money to pay for that additional help that enables you to focus on executing the business. But if you're constantly putting out fires and you're the one running around doing all the work, you're just going to be in a purgatory.
I think it's so important that you three are choosing to talk about this. So I want to thank you again. It reminds me of an old saying I like of, we all go through ups and downs. That's life. On the way up is when you make money, and on the way down is when you build your reputation. And I think like the way that you three have chosen to navigate the hard times is really revealing. And I think you build wisdom. Wisdom is forged in those really hard and scary times. Psychologically, we learn more from failure than we do from success. And so, and maybe a fourth perspective to the conversation is someone who's had a business fail. It's been 10, 15 years. Not only would I go back and do it again, but I'm like actually grateful for the lessons I've learned. It's made me a better operator. It's made me a better human. And so I think I want to underscore what you were saying, Caroline. The importance of that is if you're going through hard times, find your people and talk about it. It's more common than you'd think. And it's probably the best antidote to those really scary thoughts of it being personalized and about you. It's just a part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's the unfortunate part. It's the underbelly, but it's a part of it. So to the three of you, I want to say thank you. Thank you for each of you sharing your stories. We'll have links on how listeners can get in touch with each of you if you guys are open to that, and if the listener wants to reach out. And
just to piggyback on what you're saying, people are never going to remember the business that you ran. They're going to remember this conversation. I'm going to remember having these connections with Caroline and with you and with Damon for the rest of my life. And that's the most important thing, and what people need to remember when things get tough. Business is business. It's not defining of who you are as a person. The relationships that you forge along the way is what matters. And I just want to thank you again for being there for me in my dark times, but also giving me the platform to talk about this as well.
What a note to end on. To the three of you, thank you. Really, all of us are now rooting for you, whether that's a new chapter or Caroline just cruising forward in the current chapter. I'm rooting for each of you. Thank you again for your time today, and let's call that the podcast.